Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man's Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is William McReynolds, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 17 years now, and in that time, I've pulled more than 200 people out of these Kentucky mountains alive. I know every trail marker, every hidden cave, every spot where city folks get themselves turned around and lost. I'm telling you this, so you know I'm not some weekend hiker with wild stories. I've got my wilderness first aid papers, my search and rescue training, and enough common sense to know the difference between a bear track and a boot print. Before September of 1974, I would have laughed at the old Cherokee stories my grandfather used to tell about stone monsters in the deep hollows. Hell, I was sure the beast of Bladenboro down in North Carolina was just a rabid dog until what happened that month. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. September 17th, hot as summer even though the leaves were starting to turn. We'd been in a drought for 6 weeks, and the mountains felt like they were holding their breath. My radio crackled to life just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee at the Pine Mountain Station. "Bill, we got a situation down at Hunger Creek," dispatch said. Sarah's voice sounded tight, which wasn't like her. She'd been handling emergency calls for 12 years. Family of 5 missing since Friday. Car found abandoned at the old logging road. 4 days. In this heat, that was bad news. "I'm 20 minutes out," I told her, already grabbing my pack. "Any details on the family?" The Chens from Louisville. Parents in their 30s, 3 kids aged 8 to 14. They were supposed to check out of their campground Sunday morning. I knew the area she was talking about. Hunger Creek ran through one of the deepest hollows between Pine Mountain and Cumberland Gap, about 35 miles from the nearest real road. It was beautiful country, all sandstone cliffs and hidden waterfalls, but it could be dangerous if you didn't know what you were doing. Cell phone towers couldn't reach down into those valleys, and the old Cherokee trails could confuse even experienced hikers. The drive took me past the turnoff where my grandfather used to live, back when this was all coal country. He died when I was 12, but I still remembered his stories about the mountains. He was half Cherokee, and he used to tell me about things that lived in the deep places, things that were older than the white settlers, older than the Cherokee themselves. Stone giants, he called them. None you knew we, in the old language. "Just stories, Bill," I told myself, like I always did when those memories crept in. Just old mountain tales. But as I turned onto the gravel road that led toward Hunger Creek, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods were too quiet. In all my years ranging these mountains, I'd never heard silence like this. No birds, no insects, no rustle of squirrels in the trees. Even my truck engine seemed muffled, like the forest was swallowing the sound. I found their car where dispatch said it would be, a blue Honda Civic parked crooked at the end of the logging road. The doors were unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Their camping gear was scattered around like they'd packed in a hurry, but there was no sign of struggle. Just 5 sets of footprints leading toward the trail that wound down into the hollow. I called it in and started following the trail, marking trees with orange flagging tape as I went. Standard procedure. The footprints were easy to follow at first, the parents wearing hiking boots, the kids in sneakers. They'd stayed on the main trail for about a mile before branching off onto what looked like an old deer path. That's when I noticed my compass acting up. The needle kept spinning, never settling on true north. I tapped it a few times, figuring maybe the old mine shafts in the area were throwing off the magnetic field. These mountains were full of abandoned coal mines from the 1922nd. And some of them ran pretty deep. The trail the family had taken led down into the heart of the hollow, where Hunger Creek cut through walls of sandstone 100 feet high. Ancient rhododendron bushes grew thick along the water, some of them big enough to hide a car. It was the kind of place that stayed cool even in summer, where the light came filtered through layers of green leaves and morning mist hung around until noon. But today there was no mist, and the air felt wrong somehow. Too still, too warm, like breathing through wet cotton. I'd been following the trail for 2 hours when I found their campsite. What was left of it, anyway? The camp was in a small clearing beside Hunger Creek, maybe 50 yards from where the trail curved around a massive boulder. It looked like they'd been there for at least 2 nights. There were the remains of multiple fires, and I could see where they'd strung a tarp between trees for shade. But something had torn through the site like a tornado. Their tent was shredded, long rips that looked too clean to be from any animal I knew. Sleeping bags were scattered around the clearing, some of them hanging from tree branches 15 feet off the ground. Canned goods from their food supply were crushed flat, as if something incredibly heavy had stepped on them. But it was the trees that made my blood run cold. 3 massive oak trees at the edge of the clearing had been clawed, deep gouges running from about 6 feet up the trunk all the way to the ground. The marks were 8 inches wide, cut so deep they'd reached the heartwood. Fresh sap was still oozing from the wounds, which meant whatever made them had been here recently. I'd seen bear claws before, and these weren't bear claws. No bear in Kentucky was big enough to reach 6 feet up an oak tree and leave marks this size. A grizzly might manage it, but grizzlies had been gone from these mountains for over a century. I took photos with my camera and called it in on the radio. Static was heavy, but I managed to get through to dispatch. "Sarah, I'm going to need backup down here, and get me Jake Morrison if he's available." "What did you find, Bill?" I looked around the destroyed campsite, trying to find words for what I was seeing. "I'm not sure yet, but we're dealing with something big." Jake Morrison was the best tracker in the Forest Service, and if anyone could make sense of these marks, it would be him. While I waited for him to arrive, I started a proper search pattern around the campsite. The family's trail led away from the clearing toward the creek. 5 sets of footprints in the soft mud near the water's edge. But mixed in with their tracks was something else. The prints were massive, almost human-shaped but wrong somehow. Each one was over a foot long and showed what looked like 5 toes. But the impressions were too deep, like whatever made them weighed far more than any human. Strangest of all, the prints looked old, not weathered, but like they'd been pressed into stone instead of mud. I was kneeling beside one of the tracks, trying to measure it with my ruler, when I heard Jake's voice behind me. "Jesus, Bill. What the hell happened here?" I turned around and saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at the claw marks on the trees. Jake was 26, fresh out of college with a forestry degree, but he'd grown up in these mountains and knew them as well as anyone half his age. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I said. "Family of 5, missing since Friday. This is where they camped." Jake walked over to the trees and ran his fingers along the claw marks. "These are fresh, maybe 6 hours old." He looked back at me, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. "But Bill, what's got claws this big?" "I was hoping you could tell me." We spent the next hour documenting everything we could find. Jake brought thermal imaging equipment, which was still pretty new technology back in '74. We figured if the family was hiding somewhere in the area, maybe hurt or scared, the thermal camera might pick up their body heat. That's when things got really strange. The thermal camera showed the clearing just fine. We could see our own heat signatures, the warm spots where the sun hit the rocks, the cool areas in the shade. But when Jake pointed the camera toward the tree line, something was wrong with the image. "Bill, come look at this." I moved over to where he was standing and looked at the small screen. At the edge of the thermal image, right where the forest grew thick, there was a cold spot. Not just cool like shade, but cold like ice, and it was moving. "Equipment malfunction?" I asked. Jake checked the settings and tried again. The cold spot was still there, drifting slowly between the trees about 100 yards away. It was roughly human-shaped but huge, maybe 12 feet tall. "There's no way that's right," Jake said. "Nothing runs that cold unless it's—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he was thinking. "Unless it was dead." We tried to follow the cold spot on the thermal camera, but every time we moved toward it, the signal would fade. After 20 minutes of chasing shadows, Jake packed up the equipment and we went back to following the footprints. The trail led deeper into the hollow, following Hunger Creek as it wound between high sandstone walls. The family had stayed together for the most part, though I could see places where the youngest kid had wandered off the main path to look at something before being called back. We'd been tracking for about an hour when Jake stopped suddenly. "Bill, look at this." He was pointing at a section of trail where the creek ran close to a sandstone cliff. In the soft ground beside the water, clear as daylight, was one of those massive footprints. But this one was different from the others. This one was pressed into solid rock. The print was sunk an inch deep into sandstone that should have been harder than concrete. I knelt down and touched the edge of the impression. The stone around it was smooth, like it had been heated and cooled suddenly. "Jake," I said quietly, "get on the radio. Tell dispatch we need a full search team down here. And tell them to bring everything we've got." He was already reaching for his radio when we heard the sound. It came from somewhere deep in the hollow, echoing off the canyon walls. A low rumbling, like grinding stone, but with something almost musical underneath it. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, rising and falling like a giant breathing. We stood there frozen for maybe 30 seconds, listening to that impossible sound roll through the forest. When it finally faded, the silence that followed felt even deeper than before. "What the hell was that?" Jake whispered. I looked at the footprint pressed into solid stone, then up at the claw marks that were too high and too deep for any animal that should exist in these mountains. "I don't know," I said, "but I think we're about to find out." We found Richard Chen 3 miles downstream from the campsite. What was left of him anyway? He was lying beside a deep pool where the creek had carved out a swimming hole over thousands of years. At first glance, he looked peaceful, like he'd laid down for a nap in the afternoon sun. But when I got closer, I could see that something was terribly wrong. His skin was gray, almost translucent, and when I touched his wrist to check for a pulse, his arm felt like it was made of marble, cold as winter stone, hard as granite. There was no decomposition, no smell of death, just this impossible transformation of human flesh into something that looked like carved rock. "Bill," Jake called from the other side of the pool. His voice was shaking. "You need to see this." I walked around the edge of the water and found him staring at the sandstone cliff that rose up from the far side of the pool. Carved into the rock face, about 8 feet up, was something that made my knees go weak. A perfect handprint, pressed into the cliff like it was wet clay. The hand was massive, with fingers that would have been a foot long on a living person. But this wasn't carved by any tool. The edges were too smooth, the depth too even. It looked like someone had pressed their hand against soft stone and left an impression that would last forever. "How old you figure that is?" Jake asked. I looked at the handprint, then at Richard Chen's stone-gray body, then back at the handprint. A terrible understanding was starting to creep into my mind. "I don't think it's old at all," I said. That's when we heard the scream. It came from upstream, back toward where we'd left the main trail. A woman's voice, high and terrified, echoing off the canyon walls. Then, a child crying, and a man shouting something I couldn't make out. Jake and I looked at each other for maybe half a second. Then we were running. We crashed through rhododendron bushes and scrambled over fallen logs, following the creek back toward the source of the screams. The sound came again, closer this time, and I could make out words. "Run, kids, run, don't look back." We rounded a bend in the creek and saw them, Linda Otherwater Chen, or what was left of the Chen family. The mother, Linda, was backing toward the water with her 2 youngest children behind her. Her teenage son Tommy was standing between them and something I couldn't see clearly, something that seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow. "Hey!" I shouted, raising my rifle. "Forest Service, get away from them!" The shadow turned toward us, and I got my first clear look at the thing that had been hunting the Chen family for 4 days. It was 12 feet tall and roughly human-shaped, but made of something that looked like weathered sandstone. Its skin moved like living rock, shifting and flowing with each step. Where its eyes should have been, 2 points of amber light glowed like coals in a forge. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth like broken stalactites. The creature looked at us for a moment, tilting its massive head as if curious about these new arrivals. Then it spoke, and its voice was like grinding millstones, deep and hollow and impossibly old. It spoke in Cherokee. I couldn't understand most of it, but I caught a few words my grandfather had taught me. Stone, mountain, sacred, guardian. Then it raised one massive hand toward Tommy Chen, and I watched in horror as the boy's feet began to turn gray. The petrification spread up from his sneakers like frost on a window, creeping up his legs toward his waist. Tommy looked down at his own body in confusion, then terror, as his flesh hardened into living stone. "No!" Linda Chen screamed and lunged toward her son. I didn't think. I just reacted. My rifle was already up, and I put 3 rounds center mass into the creature's chest. The bullets struck home with sounds like hammer blows on stone, chipping off fragments of its hide but not slowing it down. The creature turned its burning eyes on me, and I felt something touch my mind. Not words, but images. I saw the mountains as they were 1,000 years ago, covered in forests that had never known the sound of an axe. I saw Cherokee villages in the valleys, and burial caves hidden in the high cliffs. I saw miners with dynamite and bulldozers tearing into sacred ground. And I understood. This thing wasn't just some random monster. It was a guardian, placed here by the Cherokee to protect something important. And we had stumbled into its territory at the worst possible time. Jake appeared beside me with his own rifle. But before either of us could fire again, the creature did something that shouldn't have been possible. It stepped backward into the solid rock face of the cliff and disappeared, like sinking into water. For a moment, the only sound was Linda Chen sobbing. Tommy was still alive, but from the waist down he was solid stone. The two younger children, a girl about 10 and a boy maybe 8, were pressed against their mother and crying. "What is that thing?" Linda asked, looking at me with desperate eyes. "What happened to my son? Where's Richard?" I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that we'd get them out of there and find a doctor who could explain what had happened to Tommy. But looking at the boy's stone legs, at the massive handprint in the cliff face, at the impossible wrongness of everything around us, I knew there were no easy answers. "Ma'am, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "We're going to get you and your children out of here, but we have to move fast. That thing, whatever it is, it's not done with us." As if to prove my point, the grinding sound came again from somewhere inside the cliff. The creature was moving through solid rock like it was air, and from the sound of it, it was circling around to cut off our escape route. Jake grabbed my arm. "Bill, we need to go, now." I looked at Tommy Chen, half boy and half statue, and made the hardest decision of my career. "Can you carry him?" I asked Jake. "I'll try." Jake lifted Tommy in his arms, the boy's stone legs making him impossibly heavy. Linda Chen gathered her two younger children, and we started back toward the main trail at a desperate pace. Behind us, the grinding sound was getting louder. We made it maybe half a mile before the creature cut us off. It rose up out of the ground right in the middle of the trail, emerging from solid earth like a swimmer surfacing from deep water. Up close, I could see details that made my skin crawl. Its hide wasn't just stone-colored, it was actual stone. Weathered sandstone and limestone flowing together like living geology. Ancient symbols were carved into its chest and arms, Cherokee writing that seemed to glow with the same amber light as its eyes. "You trespass on sacred ground," it said, and this time its English was perfect, though still spoken in that grinding, ancient voice. "You bring machines to tear the mountain. You wake the dead with your noise." "We're not miners," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just looking for this family. They got lost." The creature's burning gaze fixed on me, and I felt that mental touch again. Images flooded my mind. Cherokee families burying their dead in caves high in the cliffs, generations of warriors standing guard over sacred sites, Spanish explorers and then English settlers pushing deeper into the mountains. And through it all, watchers like this one, sleeping in the stone until they were needed. "Your people tear the mountain for black blood," it said. "They bring thundersticks to break the sacred caves. The dead cannot rest." I understood then. Strip mining. A company somewhere had plans to tear up this part of the mountain for coal, and somehow that had awakened this ancient guardian. The Chen family had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Look," I said, "if there's mining planned, we can stop it. We can make sure your sacred places are protected. But you have to let these people go." They didn't know. The creature tilted its massive head, studying me. "You speak truth, son of the mountain. Your blood knows the old ways. My grandfather's Cherokee heritage. Somehow it could sense that." "Yes," I said. "My grandfather told me the stories. About the guardians who protect the sacred places. He called you Nun Yunu We." For the first time, the creature's burning eyes seemed to soften slightly. "The old man spoke wisdom. But the young do not listen. The mountain cries out in pain." Jake was struggling to hold Tommy Chen, the boy's stone lower body getting heavier by the minute. Linda and her other two children were huddled together, watching this impossible conversation between a forest ranger and a creature that shouldn't exist. "Please," Linda said suddenly. My son, can you change him back? The creature looked at Tommy, and I saw something that might have been sadness in its ancient features. The stone touch spreads when I am angry, when the sacred ground is violated. I cannot undo what my rage has wrought. Tommy's petrification had crept up to his waist now. The boy was still conscious, still breathing, but I could see the terror in his eyes as he felt his own body hardening into stone. But you can stop it from spreading? I asked. If the mountain is left in peace, if the thunder sticks do not come, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I'll make sure of it. I promise you, on my grandfather's grave, that I'll stop any mining operations in this area. But you have to let them go. The creature stared at me for a long moment, and I felt it searching my mind, looking for deception. Whatever it found seemed to satisfy it, because it nodded slowly. You speak with honor, grandson of the mountain. I will remember your promise. It raised one massive hand toward Tommy, and the boy's stone flesh seemed to shimmer. The petrification stopped spreading, freezing at his waist like a line drawn in sand. That is all I can do, the creature said. The boy will live, but he will carry the mountain's mark forever. It was better than I dared hope for. At least Tommy would survive, even if he'd never walk normally again. Thank you, I said. The creature nodded once, then began to sink back into the ground. But before it disappeared completely, it spoke one last warning. Others like me sleep beneath the mountain, grandson. Do not let your people wake them. Some are not as understanding as I. Then it was gone, leaving only disturbed earth to mark where it had stood. Jake and I looked at each other, both of us shaking from adrenaline and fear. Linda Chen was crying again, but they were tears of relief now. Her son was alive, even if he'd never be the same. We need to get out of here, Jake said, before that thing changes its mind. I nodded, but as we started back toward the main trail, I couldn't stop thinking about what the creature had said. Others like it, sleeping beneath the mountain. And somewhere, mining companies with plans to tear up these ancient hills. I had promises to keep, and I wasn't sure how I was going to keep them. But I knew one thing for certain. I'd never look at these mountains the same way again. The old Cherokee stories weren't just stories. They were warnings. And some warnings should be heeded. It took us 6 hours to carry Tommy Chen out of the hollow. The boy was conscious the whole time, but from the waist down he was solid stone, making him weigh more than Jake and I could carry together. We had to call for a helicopter airlift from the Kentucky State Police, and even then, it took 4 men to load Tommy into the rescue basket. The official report listed the Chen family incident as a geological accident. Some kind of rare mineral poisoning that caused calcification of the lower extremities. The doctors at University of Louisville Hospital had never seen anything like it, but they didn't ask too many questions when the Forest Service handed them a file stamped with enough federal seals to choke a horse. Richard Chen's body was found 3 days later, officially listed as a victim of the same geological phenomenon. The family was awarded a substantial settlement from a mining company that had been planning exploratory operations in the area. Operations that were quietly canceled and never mentioned again. I kept my promise to the creature. It took 2 years of paperwork, environmental impact studies, and calling in every favor I'd built up in 17 years of service. But Hunger Creek Hollow was eventually designated as a protected archaeological site. No mining, no development, no disturbance of the ground. The Cherokee Nation helped with the paperwork, claiming it as a sacred burial ground, which wasn't far from the truth. Tommy Chen learned to walk again, after a fashion. The doctors fitted him with special braces and taught him to move around on his stone legs. Last I heard, he was in college studying geology. His mother sends me a Christmas card every year, always with the same message. Thank you for bringing us home. Jake Morrison transferred to a different forest after what happened in the hollow. He never talked about what we saw down there, but I noticed he stopped going on solo assignments in remote areas. Last I heard, he was working a desk job in Frankfurt, handling permits and paperwork. Safer that way. As for me, I kept ranging these mountains for another 3 years before the shakes got too bad to ignore. It started about a month after the incident. I had just a little tremor in my hands when I was alone in the deep woods. But it got worse over time, until I couldn't hold a rifle steady or trust myself to make the climbs I used to handle without thinking. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress and tried to give me pills for it. But I knew better. It wasn't stress causing the shakes. It was the constant feeling of being watched, the knowledge that ancient things were sleeping in the stone beneath my feet, and the certainty that what I'd encountered in Hunger Creek Hollow was just the beginning. Because the creature was right about others sleeping in the mountain. Over the next few years, I started noticing things. Strange rock formations that appeared overnight. Hikers reporting equipment failures in certain areas. Local Cherokee elders quietly moving their families away from traditional sites that had been safe for generations. The mountains were waking up. And it wasn't just our mountains. I started getting calls from rangers in other parts of Appalachia, Tennessee, West Virginia, always the same story. Ancient sites being disturbed, unexplained phenomena, and creatures that shouldn't exist protecting places that shouldn't be touched. We'd built our modern world on top of something older, something that had been sleeping for centuries. But now, with strip mining and development pushing deeper into the wild places, that old world was stirring. The guardians were waking up. I retired from the Forest Service in 1977 and moved to a little cabin outside Berea, far from the deep hollows where the old things sleep. I tell people I'm writing a book about Appalachian folklore, which isn't entirely a lie, but mostly I just keep an eye on the news, watching for stories about unexplained incidents in remote areas, geological anomalies, mining accidents that don't quite add up. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the hills, I can hear that grinding sound echoing off the distant mountains. The sound of stone moving through stone, of ancient guardians walking their eternal patrol. I keep my promise to the creature in Hunger Creek Hollow. The sacred sites remain protected, at least the ones I know about. But there are places in these mountains that are older than Cherokee memory, older than human history. Places where things sleep that were old when the first people crossed the land bridge from Asia. If you're planning to hike in the deep parts of Appalachia, let me give you some advice. Stay on the marked trails. Don't disturb any stone formations that look man-made. And if you find yourself in a place where the silence feels too deep, where your equipment starts acting up and the animals won't go, turn around and walk away. Some places aren't meant for people like us, and some guardians aren't as understanding as the one I met in Hunger Creek Hollow. Trust me on this. I've seen what happens when you wake the stone giants. And once you've seen them, they never really let you forget. My name is Catherine O'Brien, but everyone calls me Cat. I've been a park ranger for 13 years now, working the caves and underground rescue operations in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. When people hear about my job, they usually picture me sitting in a fire tower or giving nature talks to school kids. They don't think about the times I've rappelled 200 feet down into black holes in the earth, searching for lost hikers or pulling injured cavers out of collapsed tunnels. I come from a coal mining family. My grandfather worked the mines, my father worked the mines, and his father before him. The O'Brien men had coal dust in their lungs and darkness in their blood for 4 generations. I was supposed to break that cycle, and I did, just not the way anyone expected. My dad died when I was 16. Cave-in at the Beckley mine. They said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but I've seen enough mining accidents to know better. The company blamed it on unstable geological conditions, which is corporate speak for we cut corners on safety. After that, I swore I'd never set foot in another mine as long as I lived. Funny how life works out. It was October 1977, and the first snow had already dusted the peaks around Blackwater Canyon. The air carried that bone-deep chill that seeps through your jacket and settles in your bones. I was at the ranger station, filling out equipment inventory reports, when the call came in. 3 college kids missing in the old Blackwater mine system, Deputy Sheriff Morrison told me over the radio. Went spelunking yesterday morning, cars still parked at the trailhead, but no sign of them. I knew the mine he was talking about. The Blackwater Coal Company had worked those tunnels from 1920 to 1924, when a methane explosion killed 37 men and shut the operation down for good. The main shaft had been sealed with concrete, but over the years, erosion and flooding had opened up passages that connected to natural limestone caves. Experienced cavers sometimes use the old mine tunnels to access deeper cave systems, though the Park Service strongly discouraged it. Any idea which entrance they used? I asked, already pulling on my gear. Probably the North Passage. That's where we found their backpacks. I drove out to the site in my pickup, equipment rattling in the back. The Blackwater mine was 8 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a hiking trail that wound through dense forest. As I walked toward the mine entrance, my breath came out in white puffs, and frost crunched under my boots. The opening was a dark wound in the hillside, barely wide enough for one person. Someone had moved the warning signs aside and left them stacked neatly against a tree. I shook my head. College kids always think they know better. I strapped on my helmet, checked my carbide lamp, and tested my methane detector. The little electronic box beeped reassuringly as I calibrated it. Gas pockets were the real danger in old mines, odorless, invisible, and deadly. Carbon monoxide could knock you unconscious in minutes. Methane could explode if it hit the wrong concentration near an open flame. "This is O'Brien," I radioed back to the station. "Going into the mine now. Lost contact expected due to depth." "Copy that, Cat. Check in every 2 hours if you can get back to the surface." I squeezed through the entrance and into the darkness. The mine tunnel was narrow, maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, carved through solid rock. My lamp beam danced across tool marks on the walls, pickaxe gouges and drill holes from 50 years ago. The air smelled of damp stone and something else, something organic and rotten that I couldn't quite place. About 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber where multiple passages branched off. This was where the miners had excavated the main coal seam. Rusted rail tracks still ran along the floor, and I could see the remains of wooden support beams that had been left to rot when the mine closed. I found the first backpack there, sitting upright against the wall like someone had carefully placed it. A bright blue JanSport with Jenny written in permanent marker on the front pocket. Inside was typical college hiking gear: granola bars, a thermos, extra socks, and a cheap flashlight with dying batteries. The beam from my carbide lamp swept across the chamber, and I noticed something odd. The methane detector was beeping faster than usual, indicating elevated gas levels. But the reading wasn't consistent. It spiked and dropped irregularly, like the gas was moving around instead of pooling in one spot. That's when I saw the pickaxe marks. Fresh ones. They cut across the old tool marks in straight, deliberate lines. The rock chips at the base of the wall looked recently broken, and when I touched one, it was sharp and clean, not rounded by decades of moisture like everything else in the mine. I stood there staring at those marks, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The mine had been abandoned for over 50 years. The passages were dangerous, unstable, and clearly marked with warnings. Who would be down here doing excavation work, and why? My radio crackled with static, but no voice came through. I was too deep for transmission. I picked up Jenny's backpack and continued deeper into the mine, following a passage that sloped downward toward what I hoped would be the other missing students. The tunnel walls were damp with condensation, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of dripping water. That's when my helmet light started to flicker. The carbide flame guttered and dimmed, casting wild shadows on the tunnel walls. I stopped and adjusted the gas flow, but the light remained weak and unsteady. In 13 years of cave rescue, I'd never had equipment problems like this. I carried 3 backup light sources for exactly this reason. I switched to my electric headlamp. It came on bright and steady, which should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me more nervous. Carbide lamps can be finicky, but they don't usually fail without warning. Something about the air composition down here was interfering with the combustion. The passage continued to slope downward, and I could hear water more clearly now, not just dripping, but flowing. The mine maps showed underground streams in this area, fed by snowmelt from the mountains above. During heavy rains or spring thaw, the lower tunnels could flood completely. I found the second backpack floating in a shallow pool where the tunnel leveled off. This one belonged to someone named Marcus, a serious hiker's pack with good gear inside. His headlamp was waterproof and still working, which meant he'd either lost the pack accidentally or abandoned it in a hurry. The water in the pool was ice cold and crystal clear. I could see the bottom perfectly, maybe 3 feet down, covered with smooth stones and what looked like old metal debris. But when I knelt to examine Marcus's pack more closely, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were more fresh tool marks here, carved into the wall just above the waterline. And not just pickaxe marks this time. Someone had used a chisel to cut precise letters into the stone. "Help us." The letters were recent, definitely not 50 years old. The edges were sharp and clean, and tiny rock chips still clung to the crevices. But here's what really bothered me. The carving was at shoulder height, which meant whoever made it had been standing in this exact spot, probably within the last few days. I stood up and called out, "Hello, Park Service, can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed down the tunnel and faded into silence. No response. I checked my methane detector again. The readings were getting stranger. The device would beep rapidly for a few seconds, then go quiet, then start up again. It was like the gas concentration was pulsing, which made no scientific sense at all. The tunnel continued past the pool, curving to the right and descending even more steeply. I could hear the water sound getting louder, and my light revealed that the walls were changing from carved stone to natural limestone. This was where the mine tunnels connected to the cave system. That's where I found Tom Bradley. He was sitting with his back against the wall, knees drawn up, staring at nothing. For a split second, I thought he was one of the missing college students. Then I recognized the yellow hard hat and the mine safety engineer's jacket. "Tom?" I called out. "Tom, what are you doing down here?" He didn't respond. As I got closer, I could see that his eyes were open but unfocused, like he was looking at something very far away. His breathing was shallow and regular. When I shined my light on his face, he didn't blink or react at all. I knelt beside him and checked his pulse. Strong and steady. No obvious injuries, no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning. But something was definitely wrong. Tom Bradley was one of the most experienced mine safety experts in West Virginia. He knew these tunnels better than anyone, and he would never venture down here alone without proper equipment and backup. "Tom," I said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" His head turned toward me slowly, like he was waking up from a deep sleep. When he focused on my face, his expression went from confusion to terror in the space of a heartbeat. "Cat?" he whispered. "How long have I been here?" "I don't know. When did you come down?" He looked around wildly, as if he'd never seen the tunnel before. I don't remember coming down here. I was at the office, reviewing safety reports. And then, he pressed his palms against his temples. There was something wrong with the gas readings. Someone reported impossible methane concentrations. I had to check it out. My detector was beeping again. That same irregular pattern. Tom noticed it too. "What's your reading?" he asked. I looked at the display. 15 parts per million, but it keeps spiking to 30, then dropping back down. Tom's face went pale. "That's not possible. Gas doesn't move like that in a stable tunnel system." We both fell silent, listening to the water sounds echoing from deeper in the mine. Then I heard something else, a rhythmic tapping sound, metal on stone coming from somewhere ahead of us. Tap, tap, tap. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Tom nodded. "Sounds like someone's working." We followed the tunnel toward the sound, moving carefully over loose rocks and shallow pools. The tapping grew louder and more distinct, definitely a pickaxe or similar tool striking stone in a steady rhythm. My light beam revealed that we were entering a larger chamber, part of the original mine excavation. The tapping stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat and Tom's rapid breathing beside me. My light swept across the chamber, revealing rusted mining equipment, collapsed wooden supports, and standing water that reflected our lights like black mirrors. Then I saw the lunch pail. It was sitting on a rock ledge at about chest height, an old-fashioned metal pail with a wire handle, the kind miners used to carry in the 1922. But this one looked brand new, no rust, no dents, paint still bright red with Blackwater Coal CO, stenciled in white letters on the side. "That wasn't here before," Tom said quietly. I approached the lunch pail carefully, my detector beeping faster as I got closer. When I opened the lid, warm air escaped, carrying the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Inside was a complete meal. 2 thick sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, an apple that looked like it had just been picked, and a thermos that was still warm, to the touch. At the bottom of the pail was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Written in pencil, in old-fashioned script, was a single line: "They're still hungry." That's when the lights went out. Not our lights, those were still burning. But somewhere in the darkness ahead of us, I had seen other lights. Helmet lamps, bobbing and weaving like a group of workers moving through the tunnels. And now they were gone, extinguished all at once, leaving us alone in the black silence underground. Tom grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." But as we turned to go back the way we came, my light beam caught something that made my blood freeze. Fresh footprints in the mud, leading away from where we stood. Dozens of them, in heavy work boots, all heading deeper into the mine. And they were still filling with water, which meant whoever made them had passed by just moments before. Tom and I moved quickly back toward the entrance, but something was wrong with the tunnel. Passages that I remembered being clear were now blocked with fallen stones. Turns that should have led back to the main chamber instead curved off into darkness I didn't recognize. "Are we lost?" Tom asked, his voice tight with controlled panic. I stopped and checked my compass. The needle was spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. "The rock formation must be interfering with the compass," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. We had been walking for 20 minutes, and we should have reached the entrance by now. Instead, we found ourselves in a part of the mine I'd never seen before. A wide tunnel with proper wooden supports and iron rails that looked like they'd been maintained yesterday. My methane detector was going crazy now, beeping constantly at levels that should have been lethal. But neither Tom nor I felt dizzy or short of breath. If anything, the air seemed cleaner here, with a strange metallic taste that reminded me of ozone before a thunderstorm. "Look at this," Tom said, kneeling beside the railroad tracks. The rails were polished bright, free of rust, as if trains still ran through here regularly. Between the wooden ties, I could see fresh coal scattered on the gravel, not the dusty remnants you'd expect in an abandoned mine, but chunks of coal that looked freshly broken. That's when we heard the voices. They came from ahead of us, echoing down the tunnel, the sound of men talking and laughing, the clank of tools, the rumble of wheels on rails. It sounded like a shift of miners heading to work. Except that was impossible. This mine had been closed for over 50 years. "Hello," I called out. "We're park rangers. We need assistance." The voices stopped immediately. The silence that followed was complete and unnatural, like someone had thrown a switch and cut off all sound. Tom grabbed my arm. "Cat, we need to get out of here." But when we turned around, the tunnel behind us was different again. Where there had been a clear passage, now there was only a wall of fallen stone, as if the tunnel had collapsed the moment we passed through. We were trapped. I forced myself to stay calm and think like a professional. "There has to be another way out," I said. "These old mines usually have multiple shafts for ventilation." We continued forward, following the maintained tunnel. The wooden supports became more elaborate, with proper crossbeams and metal reinforcements. Electric lights hung from the ceiling, old-fashioned bulbs in wire cages, but they weren't connected to any power source I could see. Then, impossibly, they began to flicker on. One by one, the bulbs came to life, creating pools of yellow light that stretched ahead of us down the tunnel. But the light was wrong somehow, too warm, too steady, and it cast shadows that seemed to move independently of our bodies. "This isn't possible," Tom whispered. As we walked under the electric lights, I noticed that our own helmet lamps were getting dimmer. The carbide flame in my backup lamp had died completely, and Tom's electric light was fading like a dying battery. We emerged into a vast underground chamber that took my breath away. It was enormous, easily 100 feet across and 60 feet high, with electric lights strung along the walls and a network of wooden platforms connected by ladders and catwalks. Mining equipment filled the space. Rail cars loaded with coal, mechanical lifts, huge pneumatic drills, and all of it looking like it had just been serviced. And there were the miners. At first, I thought they were mannequins or some kind of historical display. Dozens of men in work clothes and hard hats, frozen in the middle of their tasks. Some were loading coal cars, others were operating machinery. A few were eating lunch from metal pails just like the one we'd found. Then, one of them turned his head and looked directly at me. He was a big man with a thick mustache and coal-stained overalls. His hard hat was dented and scratched, and his face was covered with black dust. But his eyes were clear and very much alive, and when he smiled, I could see that half his teeth were missing. "Well, looky here," he said in a voice like gravel. Visitors. The other miners began to move, setting down their tools and turning toward us with expressions of mild curiosity. They moved like living people, but something was fundamentally wrong with the way they looked. Their bodies seemed slightly transparent, like photographs that had been exposed twice, and they cast no shadows under the electric lights. Tom made a choking sound beside me. I looked at him and saw that his face had gone completely white. "Cat," he whispered, "look at their hard hats." I followed his gaze and felt my knees go weak. Every single miner was wearing a helmet with the same logo. Blackwater Coal CO, 1924. The big miner with the 24 mustache stepped forward, and I could see now that the left side of his skull was caved in, as if he'd been struck by falling rock. Dark liquid, that might have been blood, seeped from the wound and dripped onto his collar. "Name's Ezekiel Shaw," he said pleasantly. "Foreman of the day shift. Been waiting a long time for some company down here." "We're park rangers," I managed to say. "We're looking for 3 missing college students." Shaw's grin widened. "Oh, we found 'em already. They're around here somewhere, safe and sound, don't you worry." He gestured to the other miners, and they began to close in around us. I could see their injuries now: crushed limbs, burn marks, wounds that should have been fatal. These weren't just dead men. These were men who had died violently, horribly, in the explosion that closed the mine. "You know what the problem was?" Shaw continued conversationally. "Company bosses. They knew the methane levels were dangerous. They knew the supports were rotten and the ventilation was poor. But they wanted that coal out before winter, so they told us to keep digging." The circle of miners was getting tighter. Tom pulled out his radio and tried to call for help, but there was only static. When the gas finally caught fire, Shaw said, "It burned hot enough to melt steel." Most of us died in the first few seconds, the lucky ones anyway. Some of us got trapped in the cave-in after, buried alive with nothing but darkness and the sound of our own screaming. I looked around desperately for an escape route, but the miners had us completely surrounded. In the distance, I could see more figures emerging from side tunnels, dozens of them, maybe more than the 37 who had officially died in the explosion. "Here's the thing about dying down here," Shaw continued. "You don't really get to leave. The coal dust gets in your lungs, the darkness gets in your eyes, and the weight of all that rock above you gets in your eyes. We've been waiting down here for 53 years, and it gets mighty lonesome." One of the miners, a young man with most of his face burned away, grabbed Tom's arm. Tom screamed and tried to pull free, but the dead miner's grip was like iron. "So we've been collecting visitors," Shaw said. "Folks who wander down here looking for adventure or treasure or whatever. They usually don't stay long at first. But eventually, they stop trying to leave. Eventually, they understand that they belong down here with us." The burned miner was dragging Tom toward a flooded section of the chamber. I could see dark water stretching back into shadows, and I realized with horror that there were bodies floating just below the surface. The missing college students, their eyes open and staring, their skin pale and bloated. "Your turn, Ranger Lady," Shaw said, reaching for me with hands that looked like they'd been crushed in machinery. That's when I remembered the explosives. As Shaw's broken hands reached for me, I jerked backward and my equipment belt caught on a piece of mining machinery. The impact jarred loose one of the emergency charges I always carried for avalanche rescue, a small but powerful explosive designed to trigger controlled collapses. The dead miners paused, their hollow eyes fixed on the blasting cap in my hand. "You don't want to do that, miss," Shaw said, his voice losing its friendly tone. "Bring down the roof, and you'll be trapped down here with us forever." "Maybe," I said, backing toward the tunnel we'd entered from. "But I'd rather die trying to get out than spend eternity as one of your collection." Tom was struggling against the burned miner's grip, his boots skidding on the wet stone as he was dragged toward the flooded area. I could see more clearly now what was in that dark water. Not just the college students, but other bodies. Some in modern clothes, others in mining gear from different eras. Shaw and his crew had been collecting victims for decades. "Let him go," I demanded, holding up the explosive charge. Shaw laughed, a sound like coal sliding down a chute. "You think we're afraid of a little blast? Missy, we already died in one explosion. Can't kill a man twice." But I noticed that the other miners had backed away from me, and their transparent forms seemed to be flickering like candle flames in a strong wind. "You're not afraid of dying again," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You're afraid of being buried again, trapped under tons of rock with no way to hunt for new victims." Shaw's smile faltered. I pulled the pin from the charge. "I'm guessing you need the tunnels to stay open so you can lure people down here. Collapse enough of the mine, and you'll be sealed off from the world forever." "Don't do it," Shaw pleaded, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely afraid. "We'll let your friend go. We'll let you both leave." "What about the students? What about all the others you've killed?" "They're ours now. They belong to the mine." I looked at Tom, still trapped in the burned miner's grip, and made my decision. "Tom, when I throw this, run for the tunnel." Shaw lunged toward me with inhuman speed, his crushed hands stretched out like claws. I hurled the explosive charge toward the main support pillar in the center of the chamber and dove to the side. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The blast wave knocked me flat, and chunks of rock began raining down from the ceiling. Through the dust and debris, I could hear Shaw screaming, not in pain, but in rage and desperation. Tom broke free from the burned miner, who seemed to have lost his solid form in the chaos. We ran for the tunnel as the ceiling began to collapse behind us, huge slabs of limestone crashing down where the miners had been standing. But the tunnel was changing again. As we ran through the darkness, guided only by my failing the headlamp, I could feel the walls shifting around us. Passages opened and closed, new routes appeared where there had been solid rock moments before. The mine itself was alive, trying to trap us, trying to keep us from escaping. Behind us, I could hear Shaw's voice echoing through the collapsing tunnels. "You can't leave. Nobody leaves. The mine keeps what it takes." We ran blindly through a maze of passages that defied the laws of physics and geology. Sometimes we were running uphill, sometimes down. Sometimes the tunnel was so narrow we had to squeeze through sideways, sometimes so wide our lights couldn't reach the walls. And always, I could hear the sound of pursuing footsteps and Shaw's voice calling after us, come back and join your friends." My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like rubber when I finally saw it. A glimmer of gray light ahead, the faint illumination of the outside world filtered through the mine entrance. We stumbled toward it, gasping and exhausted, certain that at any moment the tunnel would shift again and cut off our escape. But it didn't. We burst through the narrow opening and into the cold October air, collapsing on the frost-covered ground outside the mine. Above us, the first stars were appearing in a purple sky. I turned back to look at the entrance, expecting to see Shaw and his miners pouring out after us. Instead, I saw only darkness. And as I watched, rocks began to tumble down from above the opening. Within minutes, the entrance was completely sealed, buried under tons of stone as if the mountain itself had decided to close the wound. Tom sat up beside me, his face streaked with coal dust and his hands shaking. "The students," he said quietly. "We left them down there." I nodded, unable to speak. In my mind, I could still see their pale faces floating in that dark water, their eyes staring at nothing. They were beyond rescue now, beyond any help we could provide. We made our way back to my truck in silence, and I radioed for emergency backup. The official report would list the 3 college students as victims of accidental drowning in a flooded mine shaft. The mine would be permanently sealed and posted with new warning signs, but I knew the truth. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the mountains, I can still hear Shaw's voice calling from somewhere deep underground. Come back and join your friends." The mine entrance was sealed with concrete 3 days later. A construction crew from the State Highway Department brought in heavy machinery and filled the opening with enough cement to stop a freight train. The official reason was unstable geological conditions, but I knew better. The bodies of Jenny Martinez, Marcus Webb, and David Chen were never recovered. The official report listed them as presumed drowned in an underground flood, victims of their own reckless exploration of a clearly marked dangerous area. The families held memorial services with empty caskets. Tom Bradley took early retirement 2 weeks after our escape. He sold his house in Charleston and moved to Florida, as far from coal country as he could get. Before he left, he came to see me one last time. "I keep having the same dream," he told me, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't touch. "I'm back in that chamber, watching those bodies float in the dark water. And Shaw is telling me it's my turn to join them." I nodded. I'd been having similar dreams. The worst part, Tom continued, is that sometimes in the dream I want to. The water looks peaceful, and being down there forever doesn't seem so bad. That's when I wake up screaming. After he left, I put in for a transfer. I couldn't handle cave rescue anymore. Every time I had to go underground, I'd start hyperventilating before I got 10 feet into a tunnel. The Park Service moved me to fire tower duty, which suited me fine. I spent my days above ground, watching for smoke on the horizon and trying not to think about what might be happening in the darkness below. But you can't escape the past in coal country. The mountains are riddled with abandoned mines, and every few months, someone would go missing in one of them. The official reports always blamed equipment failure, rock slides, or underground flooding. But I started to notice a pattern. The Beckley mine, where my father died, had 3 unexplained disappearances in 1978. The old Consolidation coal operation near Summersville lost 2 hikers in 1979. Even mines that had been sealed for decades somehow claimed new victims, as if the earth itself was hungry for human company. I started keeping a file of newspaper clippings and incident reports. By 1980, I had documented 17 cases of people vanishing in abandoned mines across West Virginia. The State Geological Survey blamed unstable tunnel conditions and warned people to stay out of old mining areas. But I knew better. I knew that Shaw and his crew weren't the only ones down there. Every mine disaster, every explosion and cave-in that killed workers and left their bodies trapped in the darkness had created its own collection of hungry ghosts. The mining companies had known. They'd always known. They cut corners on safety, ignored gas buildup, used substandard materials for tunnel supports, and when the inevitable disasters struck, they sealed the entrances and moved on to the next mountain. But they never told the families that sealing a mine didn't put the dead to rest. It just trapped them with their rage and their hunger for company. In 1981, I got a call from a state mining inspector named Rodriguez. He'd heard about my experience at Blackwater and wanted to know if I'd consult on a new case. 3 experienced cavers had disappeared in the old Redstone mine near Morgantown. Their equipment had been found scattered throughout the tunnels, but no bodies. The thing is, Rodriguez told me over the phone, we're getting reports of lights moving around in the sealed sections. And some of the local folks say they can hear voices down there at night. I told him I couldn't help. I was done with caves, done with mines, done with anything that involved going underground. But after I hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 cavers, about what they might be going through in the darkness below. That night, I had the dream again. I was back in Shaw's chamber, watching the bodies float in the black water. But this time, the faces looking up at me weren't strangers. They were the missing cavers, the college students from Blackwater, my father, and dozens of others I didn't recognize. All of them staring at me with dead eyes, all of them whispering the same thing, come back, and join your friends. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. Outside my bedroom window, the mountains loomed against the star-filled sky, their peaks cutting sharp silhouettes against the darkness. And somewhere beneath those peaks, in tunnels that officially didn't exist anymore, I knew that Shaw and his miners were still waiting, still collecting, still hungry. I never went underground again. But sometimes, when I'm up in my fire tower scanning the forest for signs of smoke, I spot the old mining roads that wind up into the hills. Most are overgrown now, barely visible through the trees. But they're still there, leading to entrances that may be sealed with concrete and steel, but are never really closed. Because in coal country, the past doesn't stay buried. It waits in the darkness below, patient and hungry, calling to anyone foolish enough to venture into the depths. The mines remember everything, and they never let go. My name is Samuel Whitfield, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 20 years now, and in that time, I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I found in Moonshine Hollow back in March of 1983. Let me start by saying I'm not the kind of man who believes in ghost stories. I grew up in these mountains, heard all the old tales about the Wampus Cat and other Cherokee legends my grandmother used to whisper about. But I always figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. A mountain lion here and there, maybe a black bear walking on its hind legs, that's all those old stories ever were to me. I was 45 then, been working law enforcement in these parts since I got out of the Army. Started as a deputy sheriff before moving to the Park Service. My specialty was tracking down folks who thought the national park was their personal playground for illegal activities. Poachers, mostly, but also the occasional moonshiner trying to set up shop in some hidden hollow where they figured no one would find them. That March was particularly nasty. We'd had a warm spell that melted most of the snow, turning every trail into a muddy mess. The fog rolled in thick as soup most mornings, and it had a way of making even familiar places feel strange and wrong. But that's mountain weather for you. It changes faster than a teenager's mood. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, anonymous tip, like most of them are. Male voice, sounded local, said there was a big moonshine operation up near Cataract Falls that was killing everything that moves. Now that last part got my attention. We'd been finding dead deer and smaller game with no obvious cause, no bullet holes, no trap marks, just dead. The state wildlife folks were starting to ask questions. Cataract Falls sits about 15 miles from the nearest cabin, deep in a hollow that most tourists never see. It's Cherokee land originally, and before that, it was supposedly where Civil War deserters hid out when things got too hot. The kind of place where people go when they don't want to be found. I loaded up my truck with the usual gear: camera, evidence bags, my service weapon, and enough supplies for a couple days if I got stuck. The road up there isn't much more than deer trails and old logging tracks, and with all the mud, I knew I'd be walking the last few miles. The drive took me most of the morning. As I got deeper into the mountains, the fog seemed to get thicker instead of burning off like it should have. By the time I parked the truck and started hiking, I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. The woods were too quiet, too. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Just the sound of my boots squelching through the mud and the distant roar of the waterfall. I'd been walking about an hour when I first smelled it. Alcohol, strong enough to make your eyes water. But underneath that, something else, something rotten and sweet that made my stomach turn. I've found plenty of stills over the years, and they all have that sharp, chemical smell. This was different. This smelled like death. The path down into the hollow was treacherous. Slick rocks covered in moss, roots trying to trip you every step, and that fog making it impossible to see where you were going. I had to stop every few minutes to check my compass, which started acting strange the deeper I went. The needle would spin for a few seconds before settling, and sometimes it pointed in directions that didn't make any sense. When I finally reached the bottom of the hollow, near the base of the waterfall, I found the still, but it wasn't like any moonshine operation I'd ever seen. The thing was huge, easily 3 times bigger than most. Illegal setups. Copper tubing ran everywhere, connecting dozens of containers and heating elements. It was sophisticated work, the kind that takes real skill and knowledge. But here's what made my skin crawl. There wasn't a single human footprint anywhere around it. Just animal tracks. Big ones. Cat tracks, but wrong somehow. Too large, and the paw prints showed what looked like thumbs. I spent the better part of an hour circling that still, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The tracks were everywhere, in the mud around the equipment, on the wooden platforms, even on some of the copper pipes where something had climbed up to reach the higher connections. They were definitely feline, with the telltale 4-toed paw pads and claw marks. But they were massive, easily 8 or 9 inches across. And those thumb-like prints on the side, I'd never seen anything like them. My camera started acting up almost immediately. The flash wouldn't work right, and when it did fire, the pictures came out blurry or completely black. I burned through a whole roll of film and got maybe 3 usable shots. The compass kept spinning, and my radio crackled with static no matter which frequency I tried. But the worst part was the smell. The closer I got to the still, the stronger that rotting sweetness became. It was coming from behind the waterfall, where a narrow cave entrance was barely visible through the mist. I pulled out my flashlight and tried to peer inside, but the beam seemed to get swallowed up after just a few feet. That's when I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. It started as a low rumble, like a big cat purring. But there was something wrong with it. Too deep, too rhythmic, almost like it was trying to form words. I clicked off my flashlight and stood perfectly still, listening. The sound came again, definitely from inside the cave, and this time I could swear I heard actual syllables mixed in with the purring. I should have left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that hollow and call for backup. But 20 years of law enforcement doesn't just let you walk away from evidence, even when that evidence doesn't make any sense. I started taking notes, trying to document everything I could see. The still was definitely operational. I could feel heat coming off the heating elements, and there was fresh mash in several of the containers. Somebody, or something, was actively making moonshine here. But who? And how were they getting in and out without leaving human tracks? I was crouched down, examining a particularly clear paw print in the mud, when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate steps that squelched in the mud just like mine had. I turned around, expecting to see another ranger or maybe one of the moonshiners coming to check on their operation. The hollow was empty, but the footsteps continued, circling around me slowly. I could hear them clear as day. Step, squelch, but there was nothing there. The fog swirled where the steps were landing, like something invisible was disturbing it. I drew my weapon and called out the standard warnings, identifying myself as a federal officer. The footsteps stopped. Then something answered me. Go, away. The voice was wrong. Too deep, too raspy, like someone trying to talk through a mouthful of gravel, but it was definitely English, spoken with a heavy accent I couldn't place. Cherokee, maybe, or something older. Federal officer, I called out again, trying to keep my voice steady. Show yourself. The purring sound started again, but this time it was moving. I could hear it circling me, getting closer with each pass. And then I saw the eyes. Yellow, glowing yellow eyes, about 8 feet off the ground, watching me through the fog. They blinked once, slowly, and then vanished. I don't mind admitting I ran, not far, just back up the trail, about 50 yards to where I could catch my breath and think clearly. Whatever was down there, it wasn't human. But it was intelligent, that much was obvious. It had spoken to me, warned me off. And those eyes. No animal's eyes glow like that in broad daylight. I radioed for backup, requesting immediate assistance from the federal agents I'd been coordinating with on the moonshine investigations. While I waited, I set up an observation post where I could watch the hollow without being seen. The fog was finally starting to lift a little, and what I saw next made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. A figure emerged from the cave behind the waterfall. At first glance, it looked like a person bent over, maybe carrying something heavy, but as it moved closer to the still, I could see it wasn't human at all. It was walking on 2 legs, yes, but the body was all wrong. Too long, too muscular, covered in what looked like dark fur. And the head was definitely feline. A cat's head, but bigger than any mountain lion I'd ever seen. It moved with purpose, checking different parts of the still setup, adjusting valves, and connections with hands that looked almost human except for the claws. It was maintaining the operation, keeping it running. This thing, whatever it was the moonshiner. I watched for another hour as it worked, taking notes and trying to get photographs that actually turned out. The creature was methodical, almost obsessive about its work. It would test the mash in each container, adjust the heat levels, and carefully monitor the distillation process. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was someone who understood chemistry and had been doing this for a long time. The federal agents finally arrived just before sunset. Agent Mills and Agent Chen, both DEA with years of experience tracking down illegal distilleries. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but I could tell from their expressions he thought the isolation and fog had gotten to me. 8-foot cat person making moonshine, Agent Mills said flatly. That's your professional assessment? I know how it sounds, I replied. But you need to see this for yourself. We made camp about a quarter mile from the hollow and planned to approach the still at first light. The agents were convinced they'd find a normal operation run by normal people and that I'd just seen someone in a costume or my imagination had filled in details that weren't there. I wish they'd been right. We moved out before dawn, hoping to catch the moonshiners during their morning routine. Agent Mills carried the video camera, while Agent Chen handled the still photos. I led the way, following the same path I'd taken the day before. The fog was lighter, but the woods still felt wrong. Too quiet, too tense, like everything was holding its breath. The tracks were fresh. Not just the big cat prints I'd seen before, but smaller ones too. A whole family of whatever these things were had been active during the night. The tracks led from the cave, around the still, and then up the far side of the hollow to places I hadn't explored yet. Jesus, Agent Chen whispered when we got our first clear look at the operation. This thing's worth $500,000 easy. Professional-grade equipment, perfect setup. Whoever's running this knows what they're doing. But as we got closer, the agents started noticing the same things that had bothered me. No human footprints. Equipment positioned too high for normal people to reach easily. And that smell, the sweet rot that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Agent Mills was filming the setup when his camera started acting up the same way mine had. Static lines across the screen, image cutting in and out, audio full of bizarre humming sounds. Agent Chen's still camera worked better, but even his shots came out strangely dark and blurry. We were documenting the scene when we heard the screaming. It came from up the hillside, where the smaller tracks had led. Human screaming, full of pain and terror, echoing off the hollow walls. All three of us drew our weapons and started toward the sound, moving as quietly as we could through the underbrush. We found Agent Rivera about 50 yards up the slope. Rivera was another DEA agent who'd been approaching from the other side of the hollow, backup I didn't know was coming. Or rather, we found what was left of him. I've seen bear attacks, and I've seen what happens when people get caught in industrial accidents. This was neither of those things. Rivera had been torn apart with surgical precision, clean cuts, almost like he'd been dissected by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But the claw marks were unmistakable, long, deep gouges that had sliced through his tactical vest like it was paper, and he'd been partially eaten. The missing parts weren't random, either. Specific organs, precise cuts of muscle, like someone had been selecting the choicest pieces. Agent Mills threw up. Agent Chen just stood there, staring, his face white as paper. I'd seen enough death in my 20 years to keep my stomach under control. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated. Rivera hadn't just been killed, he'd been harvested. "We need to get out of here," Chen finally managed to say. "Call in the whole task force, maybe the National Guard. This is way beyond what 3 agents can handle." But our radios weren't working. Nothing but static on every frequency, like something was jamming the signals. And when we tried to leave the hollow, we discovered something that made our situation a whole lot worse. The paths were gone, not overgrown or washed out, completely gone, like they'd never existed. Where there had been clear trails leading in and out of the hollow, now there was just dense underbrush and rock walls too steep to climb. It was impossible, but there it was. We were trapped. That's when we heard the voice again, that same gravelly tone I'd heard the day before. But this time, it wasn't telling us to go away. Stay. For dinner. The words seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trees, the rocks, the air itself. Agent Mills spun around, pointing his weapon in every direction, but there was nothing to shoot at. The fog was rolling back in, thicker than before, and shapes moved through it that didn't look quite right. "What the hell is that?" Chen shouted, pointing toward the waterfall. Something was emerging from the cave, but this time I got a clear look at it. 8 feet tall, just like I'd estimated. The body was muscular and covered in dark fur, walking upright on legs that bent wrong, more like a cat's hind legs than human ones. The arms were long and powerful, ending in hands with opposable thumbs and claws like curved daggers. And the head was a mountain lion's, but bigger, with yellow eyes that glowed even in the dim light. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth designed for tearing meat, and a tongue that was too long and too dark. But when it spoke, the voice was disturbingly human. 20 years, it said, looking directly at me. 20 years you walk these mountains. 20 years you see nothing. Now you see too much. What are you? I managed to ask, keeping my weapon trained on center mass, even though I doubted bullets would do much good. The creature tilted its head, considering the question. I am hunger. I am the price of broken promises. I am what your people made me when they drove us from these hills. Agent Mills found his voice. Cherokee? Was Cherokee. Am Cherokee. Will always be Cherokee. But also more now, also less. The creature gestured toward the moonshine operation. Your government taught me new hungers. Alcohol for the pain, fresh meat for the anger. Both together make the curse bearable. It started walking toward us, not hurrying, just the steady pace of something that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Agent Chen opened fire, emptying his clip into the creature's chest. The bullets hit, I could see them impact, but they didn't seem to slow it down. If anything, the gunshots just made it angry. The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. 1 second it was 20 feet away. The next it had Agent Chen in its claws. The screaming lasted about 10 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Mills and I ran. We made it maybe 50 yards before Mills tripped over something in the fog. When I turned to help him up, I saw what he'd fallen over. Another body. This one had been there longer, wearing the remains of a park ranger uniform I recognized. Tommy Hendricks, who'd gone missing 6 months ago. We'd searched for weeks but never found a trace of him. Now I knew why. Sam, Mills whispered, his voice shaking. Sam, it's behind you. I turned slowly, and there it was. Close enough that I could smell its breath. Alcohol and rotting meat and something else, something wild and ancient. Those yellow eyes studied me like I was a puzzle it was trying to solve. You know these mountains, it said. Know the old stories. Know what we lost when your people came. The Trail of Tears, I said quietly. 1,838. The creature nodded. Medicine man. Tried to protect the sacred places. Your soldiers shot me, left me to die by the waterfall. But the spirits had other plans. Made me guardian of what was lost. Made me reminder of what was taken. So you kill people? Murder federal agents? Those glowing eyes narrowed. I feed. Nature of the curse. But also, I remember. Every broken treaty, every stolen mountain, every sacred grove turned to farmland. The hunger grows with the memory. Mills was crawling away behind me, trying to reach his radio. The creature's ears flicked toward the sound, but it kept its attention on me. You seem different, it continued. Not like the others who come here. You respect the mountains. Maybe you understand. Understand what? Why this place must be protected, why some secrets must stay buried, why some hungers must be fed. I realized what it was offering. Some kind of deal, some arrangement where I walked away and kept quiet about what I'd seen. All I had to do was leave Mills behind and pretend none of this had ever happened. For a moment, I actually considered it. 20 years in these mountains, and I'd learned that sometimes the old ways and the new ways couldn't coexist. Sometimes you had to choose which side of the line you were going to stand on. But then I remembered Agent Rivera's body, and Tommy Hendricks, and all the other people who'd gone missing over the years in these hills. This thing might have been Cherokee once, might have legitimate grievances against the government and the people who'd stolen its land, but now it was just a predator, and predators needed to be stopped. I raised my weapon and put 3 rounds center mass. Just like with Chen's shots, the bullets hit but didn't drop it. The creature looked down at the holes in its chest, then back at me, almost disappointed. Wrong choice, it said. That's when Mills opened up with full automatic fire from behind me. Mills's automatic weapon lit up the hollow like the 4th of July. Muzzle flashes strobed through the fog as he emptied an entire magazine into the creature. This time, the bullets had an effect. Not much, but enough to make it stagger backward and roar in pain and fury. The sound echoed off the hollow walls like thunder, and I felt it in my bones. The creature looked down at its chest, now riddled with holes that were already starting to close. Dark blood flowed, but even as I watched, the wounds were healing. Not fast, but definitely healing. Bullets cannot kill what is already dead, it said, but its voice was strained now, weakened. Cannot destroy what the spirits have made eternal. Mills was reloading with shaking hands. I kept my weapon trained on the thing's head, looking for any advantage, any weakness we could exploit. That's when I noticed something that gave me an idea. The moonshine operation. The creature had built this elaborate distillery, spent years perfecting it, and was clearly proud of its work. It had also mentioned that alcohol helped make the curse bearable. What if the still wasn't just a way to make money or feed its addiction? What if it was essential to its survival? The moonshine? I said quietly to Mills. We need to destroy the still. The creature's head snapped toward me, those yellow eyes narrowing. You would not dare. Try me. For the first time since this nightmare started, I saw something like fear cross that inhuman face. The still wasn't just important to it. The still was vital. Maybe destroying it wouldn't kill the creature, but it might weaken it enough for us to have a fighting chance. I started backing toward the moonshine operation, keeping my weapon pointed at the creature. It followed, moving more cautiously now, like it was trying to stay between me and its precious distillery. The still keeps you solid, I guessed. Keeps you in this world instead of fading back to wherever cursed spirits go. That's why you've been protecting it, why you kill anyone who gets too close. The creature's growl confirmed my suspicion. You understand nothing, Mountain Man. The spirits gave me purpose. But the pain never ends. Only the alcohol makes it bearable. Only the fresh meat gives me strength to continue. Continue what? Killing innocent people? Protecting what remains. These mountains are sacred, have been sacred for 1,000 years before your people came. Every still I build, every batch I make, every drop I drink, it connects me to the old ways, to the spirits who made me guardian. Mills had circled around behind the creature while we talked. I could see him moving through the fog, positioning himself near the heating elements that kept the distillation process running. Smart man, he'd figured out the same thing I had. Guardian of what? I asked, trying to keep the creature's attention on me. You're not protecting anything, you're just a killer hiding behind old grievances. That hit home. The creature's roar shook leaves from the trees, and it started toward me with murder in those glowing eyes. But it had forgotten about Mills. The federal agent appeared out of the fog behind the still, carrying a flare gun he'd pulled from his emergency kit. He fired it directly into the largest container of mash, and the whole operation went up like a bomb. The explosion knocked me flat and probably saved my life. A wave of burning alcohol washed over the creature, and the screaming that followed wasn't anything human or animal. It was the sound of pure agony, supernatural pain that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. The creature was on fire, but not burning the way normal things burn. The flames were wrong colors, blue and green and purple, and they moved like they were alive. The thing thrashed and rolled, trying to put out the fire, but the supernatural flames just kept spreading. The cave, Mills shouted over the roar of the burning still. It's heading for the cave! The creature was indeed moving toward the waterfall, leaving a trail of otherworldly fire behind it. I realized what it was trying to do. Get to water, wash off the flames before they could do permanent damage. If it made it to the cave, we'd lose our only advantage. I ran after it, Mills right behind me, both of us firing everything we had. The bullets still didn't seem to hurt it much, but they slowed it down, made it stumble. The creature was maybe 10 feet from the waterfall when I remembered something my grandmother had told me about Cherokee spirits. Running water, I yelled to Mills. Cherokee spirits can't cross running water. I don't know if that was true or just another mountain tale, but the creature stopped dead when it heard me say it. For a moment, it just stood there, burning with those impossible flames, staring at the waterfall like it was looking at its own grave. Then it turned back toward us, and I saw something in those yellow eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just rage or hunger, but desperation. It was trapped between the fire that was destroying it and the running water it couldn't cross. You have doomed us all, it said, its voice now nothing more than a whisper. The hunger will not die with me. Others will come. Others will feed. The mountains remember, Mountain Man. The mountains always remember. The creature took one last look at its burning still, then walked deliberately into the supernatural flames. The screaming started again, but this time it was different. Not pain, but something like relief. Like it was finally letting go of a burden it had carried for too long. The fire consumed everything. The creature, the still, even the fog seemed to burn away. When it was over, Mills and I stood in a hollow that looked completely different. Clean, somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the very air. The paths out of the hollow were back, clear as day. We found our radios worked again, and backup arrived within an hour. The official report listed the incident as a moonshine explosion that killed Agent Rivera and Agent Chen. Agent Mills and I were treated for minor burns and smoke inhalation. The creature's body was never found, though we did recover some unusual bone fragments that the lab couldn't identify. That was 37 years ago, and I'm telling this story now because I'm getting old, and because I think people need to know what's really out there in these mountains. Agent Mills died in a car accident 5 years after the incident, officially an accident, though he'd been drinking heavily since that day in the hollow. The nightmares never stopped for him, and I don't think they ever would have. As for me, well, I finished out my 25 years with the Park Service and retired with full honors. Never talked about what happened at Moonshine Hollow, never put it in any official report that would see the light of day. But I never forgot it, either. The drinking started about 6 months after the incident. Just a little whiskey before bed to help with the nightmares, then a little more to get through the day. Before long, I was putting away a bottle of moonshine every couple of days. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was feeding the same hunger that had driven the creature, just in a different way. I've been sober now for 15 years, thanks to AA and a lot of help from people who understand what addiction can do to a person. But I still wake up some nights, thinking I can smell that sweet rot in the air, or hearing that gravelly voice echoing through my dreams. Because here's the thing the creature said that still haunts me. Others will come. Others will feed. I've been tracking reports for decades now. Missing hikers, unexplained deaths, illegal stills found abandoned in remote locations throughout the Appalachian Mountains. The pattern is always the same. Remote location, sophisticated equipment, no human tracks, just animal prints that are too big and too wrong. Last month, a park ranger in West Virginia found a moonshine operation that matches every detail of what Mills and I discovered in 1983. The ranger's name is Jennifer Walsh, and she's been asking questions about similar incidents. I'm going to send her this account because she deserves to know what she might be dealing with. The Cherokee have a saying, "The land remembers." I think that creature was right about that much. The mountains do remember every injustice, every broken promise, every sacred place that was destroyed. And sometimes, that memory takes physical form and demands payment. I don't know if destroying that still actually killed the creature or just sent it somewhere else. I don't know if there are others like it out there, or if new ones are being created by the same supernatural forces that made the first one. What I do know is that there are places in these mountains where the old rules still apply, where the past isn't really past, and where hungry things wait for people who wander too far off the marked trails. So if you're planning to explore the backcountry, stick to the established paths. Don't investigate strange smells or unexplained sounds. And if you ever find a moonshine operation that doesn't have any human footprints around it, don't try to be a hero. Just walk away. Because some hungers can never be satisfied, and some guardians never stop protecting what they think is theirs. The mountains are beautiful, and they're ancient, and they're full of wonders that most people never get to see. But they're also full of things that see you first. My name is Samuel Whitfield, and this is what really happened at Moonshine Hollow in March of 1983. I'm sharing it now because the truth needs to be told, and because someone else might need this information someday. The mountains remember everything. Make sure you're ready for what they might remember about you. Asterisk, word count. Approximately 4,200 words asterisk. My name is Margaret Caldwell, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal hunters, flash floods, you name it. But April of 1985 taught me that some things can't be explained away with common sense and a good flashlight. I should tell you something about me first. My family's got history in these parts, the kind people don't talk about at church socials. My great-great-great-grandmother, Sarah Caldwell, was accused of witchcraft in Salem back in 1692. She ran before they could burn her. According to family stories passed down through generations, she and others like her fled south and disappeared into these mountains. That's where Witch Hollow got its name. Growing up, I collected those stories like other kids collected baseball cards. I studied local history, got my degree in it, and eventually landed this ranger job where I could share the real history of these mountains with tourists. The witch stuff? I always figured it was just folklore, something to make the campfire stories more interesting. The hollow itself sits about 20 miles from the main ranger station, down a trail that gets washed out every spring. It's this narrow valley between two ridges, all covered in old-growth forest. Down at the bottom, hidden under moss and tree roots, you can still find stone foundations from the 1600s, little cottages, a meeting house, a well. Sometimes I'd take school groups down there, let them imagine what life was like for people hiding from the world. The place had a feeling to it, I won't lie. Sound traveled weird in that hollow. Your voice would bounce off the rock walls and come back strange, like someone else was talking. The hikers loved it. They'd shout into the valley and laugh when the echoes came back all twisted up. I never minded working alone out there. 15 years builds up a kind of confidence. I knew every trail, every landmark, every cave and creek. I could navigate that forest in the dark if I had to. My truck was loaded with everything I might need: first aid kit, emergency radio, flares, rope, extra batteries. I was prepared for anything, or so I thought. It started with a call from headquarters on April 12th. 2 hikers hadn't checked in from Witch Hollow Trail, college kids from Richmond, doing some kind of archaeology project. They had a permit to document the ruins, supposed to camp 2 nights and report back on the 3rd day. It was day 4, and nobody had heard from them. Probably just lost track of time, my supervisor Tom said over the radio. You know how these university types get when they find something interesting. But go check it out, Maggie. Make sure they didn't twist an ankle or something. I loaded up the truck and headed out around noon. The dirt road to the trailhead was muddy from recent rains. We'd had storms all week, the kind that made the trees thrash around and turned every creek into a rushing river. I had to put the truck in 4-wheel drive just to make it through some of the deeper ruts. The trailhead parking area was empty, except for 1 car, a beat-up Honda with Richmond plates and college stickers all over the bumper. No sign of the hikers. I grabbed my pack and started down the trail. The forest was quiet, too quiet if I'm being honest, but I told myself that was just because of the recent storms. Animals hunker down after bad weather. It takes them a day or 2 to come back out. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. About a mile in, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. First, there were scratch marks on some of the trees. Deep gouges, about 7 feet up, running straight down the bark. Too high for a bear, and the marks were wrong anyway. They looked almost deliberate, like someone had taken a knife and carved lines into the wood. Then I found the backpack. It was lying in the middle of the trail, partially covered in mud and leaves. I recognized it from the description headquarters had given me: blue with yellow straps, lots of pockets. One of the college kids had been wearing it in their permit photo. I picked it up and looked inside. Everything was still there. Wallet, phone, car keys, granola bars, water bottle, everything, except the person who'd been carrying it. That's when I heard it for the first time. A scream. Not a human scream exactly. It was higher than that, so high it made my teeth hurt. It came from somewhere deep in the hollow, echoing off the rock walls until it sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. It started low, built up to that impossible high note, then cut off suddenly. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I keyed my radio. Tom, this is Maggie. I found one of the backpacks. It's abandoned on the trail. And I just heard something weird. Some kind of animal call, I think. Static crackled back at me. Then Tom's voice, faint and broken. Maggie, can't. Much interference. Check. Call back. The radio went dead. I tried again. Nothing but static. I stood there on that trail, holding someone's abandoned backpack, listening to the silence, and felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years of ranger work. Fear. I continued down the trail, moving slower now, eyes scanning everything. The backpack went over my shoulder next to mine. Evidence, I told myself. Don't leave evidence behind. The path got steeper as I descended into the hollow. The trees grew thicker here, old oaks and pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. Everything had that greenish twilight look, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. More scratch marks appeared on the trees. Some were fresh, the wood underneath still pale and wet. Others looked older, weathered. I'd been down this trail dozens of times and never noticed them before. Either they were new, or I'd been blind. I reached the ruins around 3 o'clock. The stone foundations spread out across a clearing, about 20 of them, arranged in a rough circle around what used to be a meeting house. Moss covered everything. Young trees grew up through the middle of old fireplaces. It looked like a movie set, something too perfect to be real. The college kid's tent was set up near the meeting house foundation. The tent flap hung open, moving slightly in the breeze. Their gear was scattered around the campsite: sleeping bags, cooking equipment, cameras, notebooks, but no people. Hello? I called out. This is Ranger Caldwell. Anyone here? My voice bounced around the hollow, coming back strange and distorted. Hello, 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 lo, lo. Then that wrong echo, the one that didn't quite sound like me. I approached the tent carefully. Please don't let there be bodies inside, I thought. Please. The tent was empty, but someone had been there recently. The sleeping bags were still warm to the touch. That's when I noticed the notebooks. They were lying open near the tent, pages covered in handwriting and sketches. I picked one up and started reading. Asterisk, April 10th, amazing acoustic properties in the hollow. Sound reflects in ways that don't make physical sense. Recording everything for analysis. Asterisk, asterisk, April 11th, EP. Something strange happened last night. We both heard voices in the dark, but in a language we don't recognize. Old sounding. Recorded it, but the tape came out blank. We'll try again tonight. Asterisk, asterisk, April 12th, FT6. Jenny is scared. She wants to leave. I convinced her to stay one more night. The voices are getting clearer. They sound like they're in pain. Screaming. But when we look, nothing's there. Asterisk. The entry ended there, mid-sentence, like whoever was writing had been interrupted. I flipped through the rest of the notebook. The last few pages were covered in frantic scribbles, the handwriting getting messier and messier. Asterisk knows we're here. Asterisk, asterisk, can't leave. Trail blocked. Asterisk, asterisk, Jenny saw it. Says it's made of sound. Asterisk, asterisk. Oh God, it's screaming again times. The final page just had one word, written over and over. Run, 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 run. I dropped the notebook like it had burned me. That scream came again, closer this time. That impossible high note that made my skull vibrate. It lasted longer now, maybe 10 seconds, rising and falling like a siren. When it stopped, I realized I'd dropped to my knees with my hands over my ears. Who's there? I shouted, trying to sound official and calm. This is Ranger Caldwell. Show yourself. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the trees. I got to my feet and grabbed my flashlight, even though it was still daylight. Something about having it in my hand made me feel better. I started searching the ruins, calling out for the hikers. I found Jenny behind the old meeting house foundation. Or what was left of her. She was lying face down in the dirt, arms stretched out in front of her like she'd been trying to crawl away from something. Her ears were bleeding. Not just a little bit, there was blood all down the sides of her neck, soaked into her shirt collar. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. I knelt next to her, fingers shaking as I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was cold. She'd been dead for hours, maybe since last night, but there were no wounds. No cuts, no bruises, no signs of violence except for the blood from her ears. It was like something had killed her from the inside out. I pulled out my radio again, hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Still nothing but static. The hollow was blocking the signal somehow. I needed to get out of here, get back up the trail where I could call for help. But I couldn't leave Jenny behind, and I couldn't find the other hiker, her boyfriend, according to the permit paperwork, a guy named Marcus. Marcus, I shouted. Marcus, if you can hear me, I'm a ranger. I'm here to help. The echo came back wrong again. Not my voice at all. It sounded like someone else, someone older, saying words I didn't recognize. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just heat shimmer, that wavy distortion you see on hot asphalt. But it was April, and cold, and the shimmer was moving on its own. It drifted between the trees at the edge of the clearing, about 6 feet tall, roughly human-shaped but wrong in ways I couldn't put into words. The air around it vibrated. I could see the vibrations, could feel them in my chest, like standing too close to a speaker at a concert. The thing moved without walking, just gliding over the ground, and wherever it went, the sound changed. Birds stopped singing, wind stopped blowing. Even the rustle of leaves went silent. It was made of sound, I realized. Somehow, impossibly, it was made of sound itself. The thing stopped about 20 feet away from me. I couldn't see any face, any eyes, but I knew it was looking at me, studying me. Then it opened, I don't know what else to call it, and screamed. The sound hit me like a physical wall. I stumbled backward, dropped my flashlight, pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The scream went right through my hands, through my skull, vibrating inside my brain. My teeth rattled. My eyes watered. I tasted blood in my mouth. I ran. I don't remember much about getting back to the trail. 1 second I was standing in that clearing with the sound thing screaming at me. The next I was a quarter-mile up the path, gasping for air, my ears ringing so loud I could barely think. My nose was bleeding. I wiped it on my sleeve and kept moving. The thing followed me. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it, feel it, moving through the forest behind me. Trees shook as it passed, rocks cracked. The air itself seemed to scream. I'd done search and rescue training, wilderness survival, bear safety, all of it. Nothing in any manual prepared you for being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. The trail got steeper. My legs burned. I'm in decent shape, but fear only carries you so far before your body gives out. I had to slow down, had to catch my breath, and that's when I heard the voice, Caldwell. I spun around. Nothing behind me but trees and shadows. Caldwell, the voice said again. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. An old voice, speaking English but with an accent I didn't recognize. Sarah Caldwell's blood. Who are you? I shouted. What do you want? We are the burned, the drowned, the pressed beneath stones. We are what remains when justice fails. The sound thing appeared on the trail behind me, that shimmer in the air, vibrating and wrong. But it didn't attack. It just hovered there, watching. You killed those hikers, I said. They disturbed the sacred ground. They recorded our pain for entertainment. The girl wanted to leave. We let her try. But she heard too much. Knew too much. What about Marcus? Where is he? In the well. Where they left us to drown. The old well. I knew where it was. Deeper in the hollow, hidden under a collapsed roof. If Marcus was down there. Take me to him, I said. The thing didn't move. You are not afraid. I'm terrified. But that's my job. Take me to him. The air around the thing rippled. Then it turned and glided back down the trail, toward the hollow. After a moment, I followed. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the women who fled Salem, how they could hear things others couldn't, how they could speak to spirits, to the dead, to things that existed between worlds. I'd always thought it was just family legend, something to make us feel special. But walking down that trail behind a creature made of sound, I wondered if maybe there was some truth to it. The thing led me past the ruins, past Jenny's body. I tried not to look, to the far edge of the hollow where the old well sat. The wooden cover had rotted away years ago. The Forest Service had put up a fence to keep people from falling in, but someone had torn it down. I looked over the edge. The well went down about 15 feet, ending in dark water. Marcus was floating face down in that water. Damn it, I whispered. He ran, the thing said. He saw what we are. He tried to climb out of the hollow. We could not let him tell. So you killed him. We protected ourselves, as we have always done, as we will always do. I sat down hard on the ground. 2 dead college kids. A thing made of sound that could talk. A hollow full of ghosts. This was so far beyond my pay grade it wasn't even funny. Why can I hear you? I asked. Why am I not dead? You carry the blood. You carry the gift. Sarah Caldwell was our sister. She led us here, built these walls, made this sanctuary. Her daughters, and their daughters after them all carry the gift. All can hear us. You are the first to return in many years. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about Sarah Caldwell fleeing Salem with 7 other women, about them building a secret community here in the Virginia mountains, about them dying, eventually, but leaving something behind. You're not just sound, I said slowly. You're the screams of the women who were killed. We are memory made manifest, pain given form. Every woman burned, every woman drowned, every woman crushed. We are their final cries, collected and merged and made eternal. We exist to remember what was done to us. We exist to ensure it never happens again. The thing drifted closer. I forced myself not to run. You must leave this place, it said. You must tell them the hikers got lost, fell in the well. Accidents happen in the wilderness. You must protect the hollow. And if I don't, then you join your ancestor. You become part of us. Another scream. Another voice in the chorus. I stood up slowly, hands raised. I need to think about this. I need time. You have until morning. If you bring others, we will kill them all. And you will watch. Then it was gone, dissolved back into the air like it had never been there. I was alone in the hollow with 2 dead bodies and a secret that could get me killed. I spent that night in the ruins. I know, stupid, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I built a small fire near the old meeting house. The sound thing didn't seem to mind fire, which was interesting, and went through the college kids' research. They documented everything: photos of the ruins, measurements, sketches, and recordings. They had dozens of recordings. I found their tape player and hit play on the most recent one. At first, just static. Then voices. Multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in that old accent. They were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out the words. The recording quality was terrible, like it had been made underwater. Then the screaming started. I ripped the headphones off. Even through those tiny speakers, the sound was enough to make my head pound. The notebook had more details. Jenny had been a sound engineering student. She'd noticed that the acoustic properties of the hollow where impossible sound was reflecting in ways that violated physics. She'd theorized that something was manipulating the sound waves, using them to communicate. She'd been right. She'd just figured it out too late. I sat there feeding sticks into my fire, thinking about what the sound thing had told me. About protection. About secrets. About blood. My family had always known, I realized. That's why my grandmother told me those stories. Why my mother had been so insistent I study local history. Why they'd been so proud when I became a ranger in this forest. They'd been preparing me, even if they didn't know exactly what for. I was supposed to be the guardian. The one who kept people away from Witch Hollow. The one who protected the secret. And I'd failed. I'd let those college kids come down here with their equipment and their curiosity, and now they were dead. Morning came gray and cold. I dozed off sometime around 3 and woke up to find the sound thing hovering near my fire. "You stayed," it said. I had questions. "Ask. How many of you are there? How many women?" 143 burned, 67 drowned, 29 pressed, 11 hanged. We are 250 voices, 250 screams, 250 deaths that demanded remembering. Jesus. 250 women killed in the witch trials, 250 murders that nobody ever answered for. And you're protecting the ruins because this is where we lived, where we built new lives, where we died in peace, finally, after years of running. This ground is sacred. It is ours. We will not let it be disturbed. The Forest Service isn't going to shut down the trail because of ghost stories, I said. Eventually, someone's going to come looking for those hikers. Someone's going to find the bodies. Then, you must ensure they find nothing else. No evidence, no questions. Just accidents. That's when I heard the helicopters. 2 of them coming from the north. Search and rescue birds, probably from the state police. Someone at headquarters must have gotten worried when I didn't call in last night. "They're coming to find the hikers," I said. "They'll search the whole hollow. They'll find everything." The sound thing made a noise like wind through a broken window. Angry. Scared. "We will kill them all." "No," I stood up. "No, you won't. There's another way." "What way?" "You let me bring the bodies up." I reported as a tragic accident. They were exploring the ruins. One fell in the well, the other died trying to save him. Injuries consistent with a fall. The Forest Service closes Witch Hollow Trail permanently. Too dangerous. Too many accidents. They fence it off, put up warning signs, and nobody comes back here. And if they ignore the signs, then that's on them. But you leave the rescue teams alone. You leave everyone alone unless they actually threaten the ruins. No more killing just because people get curious. The thing drifted closer until I could feel the vibration in my chest. "You would lie for us. I would lie to protect you, and to protect innocent people from becoming part of you." Silence. The helicopters were getting closer. "Sarah Caldwell would do the same," the thing said finally. She understood the necessity of secrets. "Very well, we accept your terms, but betray us, daughter of Sarah, and we will know. We will find you. We will make you scream forever." "I understand." The thing dissolved into the air. A moment later, the helicopters appeared over the ridge, their rotors thumping, searchlights cutting through the morning mist. I keyed my radio. "This is Ranger Caldwell. I'm at the Witch Hollow ruins. I've found the hikers. I need body recovery teams and a coroner. It's bad." Tom's voice crackled back, full of relief. Maggie! Thank God. We lost your signal yesterday. What happened? I looked at the ruins, at the spot where the sound thing had been, at the forest that held 250 screams. Accidents, I said. Terrible, tragic accidents. The official report took 3 days to file. Jenny Fitzgerald, 22, died of a cerebral hemorrhage consistent with a fall. Marcus Chen, 23, drowned in an old well while trying to call for help. Tragic. Preventable if they'd just stayed on the marked trail. The medical examiner bought it. The college bought it. Even the parents, devastated as they were, bought it. Because sometimes the simple explanation is the one people want to hear. The Forest Service closed Witch Hollow Trail permanently 2 weeks later. Tom argued against it. Good trail, historically significant, rare to close anything completely, but I pushed hard. Unsafe conditions, unstable ruins, high risk of injury. Eventually, they agreed. They put up a fence at the trailhead. Big signs, trail closed, danger. No trespassing. They even sent rangers by once a month to check that nobody had gone around the fence. I volunteered to be one of those rangers. That was 3 months ago. It's July now, hot and humid, and I'm sitting at my desk filling out paperwork when Tom pokes his head in. Hey Maggie, got a weird one for you. Developer wants to tour the Witch Hollow area. Says he's interested in the land for a resort project. My blood goes cold. What? Yeah, some Richmond businessman. Names. He checks his notes. Garrett Thompson. Big money guy. Says the Forest Service owns the land, but he's interested in a lease arrangement. Wants to see the site tomorrow. Tell him no. Tom blinks. What? Tell him the area's closed. Not available. Not safe. Maggie, we can't just. Tom. I stand up, try to keep my voice steady. That hollow is a death trap. We just lost 2 people there. If this guy builds a resort and someone gets hurt, the lawsuits alone would destroy us. Tell him no. Tom studies me for a long moment. You've been weird about that place since April. What aren't you telling me? Nothing. I'm just trying to prevent more deaths. He doesn't look convinced, but he nods. Fine, I'll tell him it's off limits. But if he escalates this, if he goes over my head, you might have to give a better explanation. He leaves. I sit back down, hands shaking. A developer, of course, because it's never just ghosts you have to worry about. It's always people with money and bulldozers and plans. I call my grandmother that night. She's 87 now, living in a nursing home in Charlottesville, but her mind's still sharp. Grandma, I need to know about Sarah Caldwell. The real story, not the version you tell at Thanksgiving. Silence on the other end. Then, you went to the hollow. Yes. And you heard them. Yes. Another long silence. Your mother and I, we hoped you wouldn't. We hoped the gift had died out. It skips generations sometimes. Well, I've got it. And now there's a developer trying to turn the hollow into a resort. Grandma, what do I do? You do what Sarah did. You protect them, at any cost. Even if it means lying, covering things up? Those women suffered enough when they were alive. They deserve peace now. Yes, even if it means lying. We talk for an hour. She tells me things my mother never knew. Things passed down from grandmother to granddaughter for 300 years. About the gift. About the responsibility. About the price. By the time I hang up, I know what I have to do. Garrett Thompson doesn't give up. He calls headquarters 6 more times over the next week. He files paperwork. He brings in lawyers. He's serious about this resort idea, and he's got enough money to make problems. Finally, he demands a site visit. If we don't let him see the land, he'll sue for obstruction. Tom comes to me, looking tired. I tried, Maggie, but he's not backing down. We have to take him out there. When? Tomorrow. Just a quick tour. Show him why it's dangerous. Hopefully scare him off. I nod slowly. Okay, but I'm coming with you. Wouldn't have it any other way. We meet Thompson at the trailhead the next morning. He's exactly what I expected. Expensive suit, even in the woods, fancy hiking boots that have never seen mud, holding a tablet with plans and projections. He's got 2 other people with him, an architect and a surveyor. Just want to see the lay of the land, Thompson says, shaking Tom's hand. I understand your concerns about safety, but modern engineering can stabilize just about anything. I'm envisioning a high-end wilderness retreat, very exclusive. Minimal environmental impact. I don't say anything, I just start walking down the trail. The hollow looks peaceful in the morning light. Birds singing, butterflies floating between wildflowers, sunlight dappling through the trees. You'd never know 2 people died here 3 months ago. Thompson loves it. He's already planning where to put the lodge, the guest cabins, the spa. The architect is taking photos. The surveyor is making measurements. I can feel it building. That pressure in the air, that vibration that nobody else notices. Mr. Thompson, I say carefully, I really think we should head back now. You've seen the site. Just a few more minutes. I want to get measurements of the ruins. The historical aspect could be a real selling point. Sleep where colonial settlers once lived. People eat that stuff up. He walks toward the old meeting house foundation. The screaming starts. All 3 of them, Thompson, the architect, the surveyor, drop to their knees, hands over their ears. Blood starts trickling from Thompson's nose. Tom looks at me, eyes wide with panic. What the hell is that? Get them out of here, I say. Now, what about you? I'll be right behind you. Go. Tom doesn't argue. He grabs Thompson under one arm and starts dragging him back up the trail. The architect and surveyor stumble after them, still clutching their ears. I turn to face the hollow. The sound thing appears in front of me, bigger than before. Angrier. The air around it screams. You brought them here, it says. You led them to us. I had no choice. But I got them out. They're alive. They will return. They will build. They will destroy everything. No, I say firmly. They won't. Because I'm going to make sure they never come back. How? Trust me. The thing wavers, uncertain. Then it fades back into the air. I run after the others. By the time I catch up, all 3 men are in Thompson's car, doors locked, windows up. Tom is standing outside looking shaken. What was that? He demands. Some kind of, I don't even know what. Maggie, what the hell is in that hollow? Something old, I say. Something that needs to be left alone. Thompson rolls down his window an inch. His nose has stopped bleeding, but his hands are shaking. I'm reporting this. Some kind of illegal sound weapon, or, you're not reporting anything, I say quietly, because nobody will believe you. And if you do try to file a complaint, I'll make sure every news outlet in Virginia knows that you ignored clearly posted danger signs and endangered your employees. How do you think that'll look for your business? Thompson glares at me. Then he rolls up the window, starts the engine, and drives away fast enough to throw gravel. The architect and surveyor follow in their own car. Tom turns to me. I don't know what just happened, but I know you do. Some places aren't meant to be developed, I say. Some places need to stay wild. That's one of them. He studies me for a long moment, then he nods. Okay, I'll back you up on this. But Maggie, if there's something in that hollow, something dangerous. There is, but it won't hurt anyone who leaves it alone. I promise. We drive back to headquarters in silence. That was 2 years ago. Thompson never came back. The hollow stays closed. Once a month, I hike down to the ruins and leave flowers at the old meeting house. Sometimes I hear them, the voices, dozens of them, overlapping, speaking in that old accent. They're not screaming anymore, they're just talking, sharing stories, laughing occasionally. They're at peace. And as long as I'm around, as long as I carry Sarah Caldwell's blood and Sarah Caldwell's gift, they'll stay that way. My daughter starts college next year. She doesn't know about the hollow yet, doesn't know about her family's history. But one day, I'll tell her. One day, I'll take her down that trail and introduce her to the voices that shaped our family. Because some secrets aren't meant to be buried. Some secrets are meant to be passed down. Some secrets are meant to be protected. At any cost.